Good morning, everyone. Welcome into the Her Hoop Stats podcast. Morning, afternoon, day, whenever you're tuning in. It is Monday, May 18th, and we have a heck of a treat for you today. I'm Jamie Steyer Johnson, and I've got a very, very special guest. Our guest today has blazed a trail for women's sports and women covering sports, writing for the likes of ESPN, The Athletic, the WNBA, and many more in the over 3 decades she's dedicated to her craft. 2025 inductee to the Naismith Hall of Fame as the Kurt Gowdy Print Media Award winner. Hall of Fame officials specifically highlighted her tenure as the first ever regular women's basketball columnist at ESPN.com in the 90s for shaping coverage of the game nationally. Now she's released her first full-length book, Life's Work: How Tara VanDerveer and Stanford Women's Basketball Changed the Sport. I am honored to be joined today by Michelle Smith. Michelle, thank you so much for being here.
Excited. It's a good way to start a Monday. Talking about women's basketball. There are worse ways to start a week for sure.
100%. It is definitely a luxury in my household. So glad to extend the same to you. I want to start out here, just kind of diving into the book, some of the background here. Now, you obviously have quite the history covering Stanford women's basketball, covering Coach VanDerveer. How did this book opportunity come about for you?
So Tara and I had a conversation maybe 10 years ago. It was an after the season, and she said, "Hey, would you meet me for dinner? I want to talk to you about something." And she talked about, I'd love it if you would consider doing a book on the program. And I said, I would love to. Can you tell me what you think you'd like the book to be about? And she said, well, the men's program has one and we're better than them. So that was her hook for the book. And hard to argue, by the way. But I said, let me think about it. And it was just life, like there was a period of time that went through. It was a job change and a career change for me. And there were things going on and I was getting kids through college and I just didn't have like bandwidth for that. And then when the Pac-12 blew up, and I didn't know she was going to retire at the end of that season, but I really felt like that Pac-12 moment was a marking point, and it felt like it was time to do the book. It felt like it was time to tell a story. And I was working on the book when she retired and had a moment of panic about what does this mean for the book? And what it meant for the book was I got to tie that story up with a bow, which actually turned out for me to be a huge blessing because it sort of got to tell the full range of the story and not really leave anything left hanging. So, that was the kind of the impetus for the book. I'd been thinking this is a bucket list project for me, for sure. I spent a lot of time with that program, a lot of time with Tara. I was there for so many of the things I wrote about. And so it was something I knew I needed to do.
That's so interesting. That was one of the things I wondered was like, okay, there's so much going on. Did you know, ahead of time that, okay, she's retiring. So you really had to roll with the punches with this.
I did. There was a time maybe 7 or 8 years ago where I thought that she was going to retire and then she signed an extension. And I wondered about the move to the ACC after the blow up of the Pac-12 and whether or not she would do that. But she didn't really lay any breadcrumbs for us, right? She wasn't necessarily talking about lasts and that, but, she had passed Mike Krzyzewski as the sports winningest coach. Gina was right on her heels. There was sort of a running joke about the two of them trying to hang in there so that one of them could end up with the record. And it turns out it's going to be Gino. And it turns out that Tara just decided it was time. And some of that has to do with just her making peace with the end of the Pac-12 and the ACC. Some of it has to do with, quite honestly, and she's frank about this, not thinking that the job was going to be nearly as fun considering all of the changes to the game with NIL and transfer portal. Like she really struggled with that. And so I think she just thought it was time.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, for me, I have a mom who is just about to retire from coaching for, at Iowa State, 24 years, but over 30 years altogether. And interestingly, I was at one of the last games that she coached. Iowa State played out there in the second round. And I don't have that inside information, but I saw a lot of the same things that you did with there's so many changes. And at that time I kind of wondered. And so, to have that come a little bit out of the blue, as far as, being that close to it, but to also understand that, hey, to be able to do this on your own terms is
Mhm.
so important. And it seems like that's kind of a common thread, is being able to do things on our own terms, and do things on their own terms as a program for Stanford.
Yeah, I mean, Stanford has been in an unusual situation of being this, high level academic university, having it limit the pool of athletes they could recruit. Tara coming in, Tara's really been an innovator in the game when the three-point shot started, and lots of coaches didn't want to embrace it. Tara had her teams back in the late 80s, Jen Frazee and those teams shooting threes. We're going to use this. She was, they called her video VanDerveer. And while I think it's pretty clear that video would have come to the forefront at some point, Tara was really one of the first to use videos heavily in her scout and in her preparation for the game and in her individual player meetings. And coaching the 96 Olympic team, a team that's going to go into the Naismith Hall of Fame later this summer. That is the springboard that leads to the W, and what pressure there was on her. Like, all of these threads that run through the game, I think a lot of them run through Tara. And I think Tara is a pretty singular figure in the game. And she's a different figure in the game in that she doesn't have the, I'm going to say bombast, but the big personality of
Mhm.
a Gino or of a Kim Mulkey, or even, Pat had a very distinct and very personality. And I think Tara was a little tougher to read for people. She came off more professorial, but as much as she was a teacher, she was a learner. And that's, for me, always also characterized her time in the game, was that constant innovation and that constant evolution.
Well, and it's interesting to me, you've had, I won't continue to extend the bio too much for you, but you've had history in public service. You work at a university, you're at San Jose State now, working in strategic communications. So you kind of balance some of the same things you mentioned with Coach
Mhm.
VanDerveer, where you work in the academic side of things, you do the sports coverage, you balance those things. Do you think that that kind of perspective and your own experience there helped you maybe understand the situation, to be able to convey that accurately for people who maybe haven't kind of straddled those two worlds as much?
Interesting question, and I guess I don't know that I thought about it like that, but I think maybe. I think there's a perspective. First of all, I think there's just a perspective with longevity, and I've said this about the Hall of Fame honor, which was a surprise and an incredible honor, but that, it's really a function of longevity, and the longer you stay in, the more you see shifts, the more you see patterns, the more you see. The thing that is so impressive to me about Tara and this generation of coaches that Tara represents, many of whom have retired or are super close to retirement, is they couldn't see it to be it. As a female journalist coming up in sports media, I had people who were blazing a path for me. I had people like Christine Brennan and Michelle Himmelberg and my dear friend Ann Killian in the Bay Area, and people who were blazing that path. But if you think about that generation of coaches, Pat being among them, like, they were girls who didn't get to play basketball nearly at a level of what girls get to play basketball now. I mean, we're still talking like 8-game seasons and, playing in canvas sneakers and, all the things. And yet they somehow figured out how to build a whole game, right? And it's remarkable to me that you can't see it to be it, but you figure out how to be it anyway. And that wasn't my experience. I felt like I had people who pushed that path for me. And I'm happy to say that I think I pushed some path forwards too, but I didn't do it without somebody in front of me. And I think a lot of these coaches, including Tara, did it without that person in front of them paving the way.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's definitely a very unique situation for that generation of coaches, especially to see the expansion in the game, which has continued. We'll get to
Mhm,
that in a little bit here, but definitely a lot of changes to adjust to there. So I want to get back a little bit to kind of your process here.
mhm,
Obviously, you've written extensively, you've reported extensively. A book is another undertaking
mhm,
altogether. But I mean, I haven't gotten through all of it yet, but
mhm.
just what I've read so far, it's interesting because it feels like long form, really in-depth report. Like, I feel like I'm right there, but there's no point where I'm like, man, I wish I had this extra piece of context, or I had to go look something up that wasn't
Mhm.
in there already. Like you really covered all the bases. So what was that process of reporting and writing that like,
Yeah.
especially compared to what you're used to doing?
What was interesting was remembering that, I have context in my brain because I was there for a lot of it, and remembering where people didn't have context and that I had to fill that in, and being really, really intentional about that. And I'll share this with you. So my oldest daughter, Annie, is a really good editor, and she grew up with me covering this team. And it's really as much as it's Tara's life work, for me, the title was intentional because it was also my life's work, particularly in my time as a working mom when my kids were young and I was traveling with them and doing all the things. Like, it's a very personal story for me as well, because that was my time when I was gone from my kids. And that was my time when I was having this experience. And Annie was editing with me, having been on a lot of road trips and things. And she kept reminding me, people don't know that. You got to make sure people know that. Like, she was sort of my check on making sure that I was providing context for people that might be reading the story for the first time or might not remember some of the details around stories. Because but I was lucky enough to be able to pull that out of somewhere. It wasn't that I didn't do research. I talked to a lot of people. I went back and I did a lot of research, but I also went, "Oh yeah, that's right. That happened. I need to add that in," right? Like, it was just these things that you remember, "Oh, I forgot that happened," calling Vanessa Nygaard and asking about her injury and forgetting that a veterinarian was the first one to diagnose her ACL tear in Oregon State, because back in those days in Corvallis, that's who they had available. So, like, yeah, it was really interesting, but it had to be very intentional to put the context around some of these things because you just know it. And then you're like, "Oh, wait, there's that great detail and I forgot about that." So,
And what a luxury to have kind of that collaborative ability with, your own kid, someone who is there, someone who gets it,
mhm.
but also can just kind of put a point on things of, hey, I feel
Oh,
like
she can put a
maybe we
point
need
on
that
things, all
extra.
right. She is my best editor and just a little brutal, but it's why, but she knows she can do that because it's her mom.
Yeah, I mean, she obviously learned it from somewhere.
She did.
So
Apples and trees, apples and trees.
so for you then, what was the role obviously outside of the bulk of the context that
Mhm.
interviewing, getting her perspective, what role did Coach VanDerveer play in putting the book together ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, people refer to it as a biography, and I think it is biographical, but it's about more than Tara. It's about some key moments in the program and how the program has really moved the game forward as well. And I don't want that to get lost because there are some
Mhm.
amazing players and their leadership and the coaching tree and the things that they did, the COVID season and what they went through and what they gave up to sort of do that, to win that COVID championship. And so it's biographical of Tara, but Tara's input, I went to her home in New York, her family home, Lake Chautauqua, and we spent a few days sitting by the lake on the porch, um, and talking about a million things. And we talked about things as we walked her dogs, and we talked about things. She took me sailing and she took me water skiing in a really early hour of the morning. I laughed. I said I thought I was on vacation. She was like, "Nope, up and be downstairs at 6:45 and ready to hit the water." Okay. I got to spend her birthday with her and at the lake. Her mom was still alive. Her mom Rita has passed in the last few months. Um, I got to watch them play online bridge from, like different rooms in the house and just shout across the house at each other about "Good move, mom. Oh, good card, Tara." I really got to see her in a different light. And that was such a formative part of that experience for me, was sort of understanding also who Tara is, and what she means to the game. We were walking her dogs one morning, and this nice man came running out of the house that he was renting on the Chautauqua property, and he was so nervous to talk to her, and he came out and said, "Coach, I just wanna tell you, so admired your career," and he was sort of stuttering, and you could tell he was really nervous, and he walked away, and she was like, "Well, that was nice," and I said, "He was so nervous to talk to you." She doesn't, she was like, "He was?" I said, "Yeah, you're Tara VanDerveer." You know, it's so funny, and so helpful to
Mhm.
be able to see that as you're telling a story about a person and their life's work, to see how they operate and how they think and how they live, and So yeah, that was really, really helpful. And I'm excited to say I'm going back to Chautauqua to do a book event with her in a couple months. So
Oh, that'll be
it'll be great.
awesome. Yeah, because so for you, I mean, you've had this long working relationship
Mhm,
and connected enough to be able to sit down to dinner and say and have her, ask
mhm,
you to take on a project of this magnitude. And so you obviously knew her fairly
mhm.
well to some degree, but how much do you feel like that expanded in this kind of time that you were together there working on the book? And then what else do you feel like really expanded in your understanding in undertaking this in depth of an experience? Maybe more about how a program functions or college athletics in general?
Yeah, it's, I understand pretty clearly how much has changed in the last few years and how different it is. Her and I always have had a great working relationship. It's always, she is the person, I will tell you, like, she remembers a birthday, and I've had a couple of things with dogs where she's just such a dog lover and a rescue dog lover where, I told her that I lost a dog at one point and she was like, "Let me call the rescue for you. Let me get you another dog. Get back on the horse. I'll get you a dog." And she's just a lovely, thoughtful human on top of being a coach. Getting to spend the time with her at Chautauqua, I really do after all of these years. I think, and especially after this project, I mean, I think Tara and I are friends. And in the sense that, we can, I can call her if something's happening and I want her perspective on it. I'll get the odd text from her that says, "Hey, this thing happened. What do you think?" Um, but she's just, I have a reverence for what she's done. I have a reverence for who she is. And I wanted to make sure that I honored all of that too. We kept through this process, she would say, "This is your book, right?" Yeah. And it was my book. And there was really like very light touches where she'd say, "I don't know if I feel like that's exactly the way it went down. Let me tell you and let me help you sort of get to that." And, I wanted to do that out of respect for her. I wanted her to feel like this book, honored what she did and honored her life's work and honored what the program has meant. So I think I approached it with kind of a respect that it wasn't ever meant to be an expose. I wasn't going to flip the thing open and talk about, this player didn't get along with this player, or here's where this relationship went bad or whatever. That's not what I was there to do. And it wasn't what I intended to do. So, I hope people see sort of that reverence in this work.
So ultimately, it sounds like you had your angle, kind of exactly as you say, your purpose in what you were trying to do, and so a lot of your decision making and approaches kind of came back to exactly as you say, staying away from not muckraking, not the drama, and so that helped to kind of crystallize what you were doing.
Yeah, I mean, my original, like, the thesis in my head was Stanford has been a game changer in the history of women's basketball under Tara. Tara is a legendary singular figure in the game. Stanford is a singular program in the game's history, and for a variety of reasons. And that was really the central thesis that I came in with was why? Why is Tara so singular? Why is what she's done, why does that put her on the Mount Rushmore of women's basketball coaches, which I think it does? Why is Stanford such an interesting examination of the various phases of the game and innovation? And even if it's not 12 championships like Connecticut or 8 championships like Tennessee, you could argue that Stanford's impact on women's basketball is as deep as all of that when you think about Neko Gumake and her leadership in the Player Association. When you think about, Bethany Donovan, who's running the W, who's basically one of the people who's in charge of the W. Um, you know, Amy Brooks, who was Amy Westerfeld at Stanford, who was a role player off the bench, who's the number one person or number two person in the NBA behind Adam Silver. Like all of these ways in which Stanford has an influence on the game that extends beyond the floor.
I think it's interesting. There's been discussion, especially I think in the past couple of years, as we've seen more professionalization of sports media in general, but particularly when it comes to women's sports, because for so long it was that you had maybe a handful of people that covered it, and outside of that, it was and still to a large degree is about passion. And so, you don't have that many full-time jobs out there covering women's sports.
More
Something I
than
see
there used to be, more than
Yes.
there used to be.
Yes, we
Yes.
are in the right direction. But
Yes.
something I see a lot is discussion of kind of that relationship between media and the people they're
Mhm.
covering. And so you say here, you feel like you at this point consider Coach VanDerveer a friend. And of course, she's retired at this point. You still, cover some things related to her. But in
Mhm.
general, what are your thoughts on that kind of delineation between media and the people that they're covering?
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely can get blurry. I've seen it get blurry. I think when you I think when you spend a long time, like we are relational creatures, and I would argue women especially are relational creatures, and building relationships, cultivating relationships is important. And so I guess I would say, like, I understand sort of that trepidation, but you see it in the NBA too. You see longtime men's NBA writers who have relationships with players in the sense that they're not only sources, but they're sources of perspective, and they're sources of, you know, they're just, I see it. But what bothers me sort of is is this sort of fan approach and then access, right? Like if
Mhm.
you're coming in and I'm going to use this as an example only because it's local for me. If you're a fan of the Golden State Valkyries and you're credentialed and you come in and your questions are clearly fan forward, you're not asking questions that are maybe tough questions, maybe questions that people don't really want to answer, or questions that are not particularly sort of fawning. Like, I think it's interesting, but when you've done something for a long time, I have relationships across the game. And, the players that I covered, I mean, I was, to have at the Hall of Fame, to go in with Sylvia and Sue, and, to have, Tamika Catchings come up and give me a big hug, and Lindsay Whalen, and say, congratulations. And we're so excited for you. And thank you for everything you've done. Like, that's part of the deal of spending a long time in the game. And, I think I've got lots of friends in the game. I would share that, when ESPN laid me off back in 2015, it was Corey Close, Lindsay Gottlieb, Tara, who went to the Pac-12 and said, we're missing somebody on the West Coast of women's basketball. Hire her to do women's basketball stuff for us, or we'll pay her ourselves. And the league went, no, we've got it. We'll pay her. But it was relationships that I had built over a long time with Corey and Lindsay and Tara and those coaches who said, we want this, we need this, go make this happen. And they went to bat for me. I don't think that necessarily compromises my ability to ask a tough question. And I think that actually, in some cases, it builds trust, that if I'm asking a tough question, they trust that they know what I'm going to do with that answer,
That's
even if they don't like it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great because I was doing, my background research here. I
Mhm.
read an interview and you talk about you're notorious for getting misty at senior day
Oh my God,
activities,
I'm the
which
worst.
okay. Maybe you're the second worst because I think that I might take the tops, but I am right there with you. But I feel like there's definitely a big difference where you talk about having people come in as fans and asking fan forward question
Mhm.
versus having just a care and a concern for
Mhm.
the people that you're covering as humans. And so
Mhm.
do you feel like that's kind of been what's informed your approach? Because you talk about how you've always wanted to make sure that especially young people, college athletes are being represented well, and that the readers and the consumers of your content are being able to get to know these people a little bit more, both off the court and on.
Yeah, I think care and concern is the way. Like, I mean, I think doing a job with care, doing a job with compassion, doing a job in which you want to help people see other people and their experiences. Like, I feel like my coverage has always been very experience focused. Like, what did that feel like? What was it like to take me through how it felt after a difficult loss? Tell me how it was to rehab for a year and sit on the bench and watch while everybody else was playing. Like, I come from it from a very experiential lens. And that requires care and concern and compassion, and letting people know that you care about what happens to them, or you want to be you want to take care in telling their story. And I think that there's absolutely space for that. I think you have to, that's how you build relationships. That's how that player comes to you later, or when you say, look, I got to ask you something, like that, you've built that trust. And I think it's necessary. I think, but it also requires a level of sort of maturity about what you're doing. It requires a level of care without fawning. I mean, I don't know I'm not finding the right word, but you really have to just, you can care. You
Mhm.
can get misty at senior day because you know what that experience means to those student athletes. And it's not that you're sad that they're leaving because you'll miss them so much. It's you're emotional because you know what that experience meant to them and their families. And I'm a mom. I have kids, I have kids that were that age. I mean, I think I got worse as my kids sort of entered that sort of high school age where I knew like endings were coming. But if something comes to an end, I'm done. Like, like the goodbye thing, terrible. So, it's just so you can feel with people. You can feel that way about people and do your job.
And so we'll take that kind of segue into, you talk about asking tough questions, being ready to
Mhm.
kind of address difficult situations. There's some stories right now that are coming out in the news about, some discussions coming from Stanford and the current leadership, particularly in the women's basketball program.
Yeah.
What are kind of your thoughts from your experience there and just what you're seeing coming out of that coverage?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I'm gonna say this. I think it's so much harder to be a coach than it was a few years ago. I think the idea that your players are, the transfer portal sits there as sort of an anvil over everybody's head. I think that NIL money makes discussions with players and their families more complicated. Who's getting what money? How much money are they getting? How do you're literally demonstrating value to individual players monetarily now, right? And then other players, I just think it's so much more complicated. But I think what concerns me is a label that we use a lot, which is toxic. Toxic, what does that mean? What does toxic actually mean? Is toxic abusive? I'm going to say this. I've never seen Kate Pay or any of the Stanford staff members be anything close to abusive. Demanding, yes. Frustrated, absolutely. Like all of the things that coaches get and express and ways to motivate. And, I'm not dismissing any individual player's concerns, but when a program or a coach gets labeled as creating a toxic environment, I don't know what that means anymore. I don't know if it means that a different player on the team got offered more NIL money, and a player's upset because they don't feel like their value is being rewarded. I just don't know what that term means, but we're going to use it, and it's going to be damaging to a lot of programs, and it's going to be damaging to coaches. And so I think we're all wading our way through it, but and again, I'm going to tell you, I work at a university now, right? I could work in an institution. And when somebody says there's a toxic environment, my question is, what does that mean to you? Like, tell me what your perception of toxic is, because that word is loaded. And in this environment, when players are transferring, when people are asking for money, when players' first interactions with coaches include, how much are you going to pay me? And this is all part of the new universe, but it's all part of what we're doing. What exactly does toxic mean? And so and I don't know the answer to the question. I know that Stanford, it has some structural issues it needs to address. Stanford is behind in NIL. Stanford is behind in the admissions process and how it admits transfers. I mean, Stanford never used to admit undergraduate transfers, but the transfer portal in all of their sports programs is making the university, the institution, have to pivot. Stanford, for a long time, relied on the value of Stanford degree for recruiting. Is a value of a Stanford degree worth as much as a six-figure offer from another school? I don't know the answer to that, but I think we're seeing that in some cases it's not, right? That players are, athletes, not just basketball players, are making different choices. So I think it's structural at Stanford, and I think it's a reflection of the time we're in. But that word toxic makes me nervous because I think it says something to the world. And I think it's sometimes in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, I mean, everyone kind of then projects their own assumption or understanding onto it, as opposed to being more intentional with your words, just being clearer. And I think a lot of that comes down to, clarity of language, having those journalistic standards. And once again, going back to, having times where you have people covering these really impactful, important stories that
Mhm.
maybe don't have that background or that experience, and so it just kind of throws into even starker relief how important it is to understand in-depth reporting and clarity of language. And so is that something
Mhm.
you're continuing to see? You've
Yeah,
been there kind of laying the groundwork, as I said earlier, but it's certainly changed a lot lately in who is discussing, who's covering the game, and who
sure.
is being listened to, I think, more
Context
than anything.
context is super important, and context is also doesn't make a very clickable headline. I mean, we're in all of the soup, right? Like, we're in multiple parts of the soup. The game is changing really, really rapidly. Players have more agency and leverage than ever, and I don't think that that's a bad thing, but there aren't any guardrails around any of it. And and I think that's an issue. And I think that, we have a media environment in which you're rewarded for getting attention. And so at what cost does all of that happen? I had when during the season, when at the end of the season at the NCAA tournament, when Iowa State lost a bunch of players all at once. And then there's people ask questions. What's wrong with Iowa State? What's going on over there that this happens? Those are super complicated questions now. Like, in some cases, I think transfers can be a contagion. Like, a couple of your friends go and you say, "Well, if they're not here, then I don't wanna be here," right? And then it turns into a little bit of a contagion, but we're just in this weird soup of so many things. And then we use words like toxic, and toxic means something to people who either aren't paying attention or are paying attention and feel like that tells them something, and I worry about it. I worry about coaches' reputations. I worry about what, what it means for specific programs. We used to have a gigantic issue with negative recruiting around different issues. I'll be honest. Like,
Mhm.
we had a lot of negative recruiting around homophobia and lots of things happening 10 or 15, 20 years ago. I'm not naive enough, by the way, to think that that may not still happen, but negative recruiting is a whole different thing now when you've got coaches who are standing in front of their best players in the handshake line so that somebody doesn't try and poach them right in the handshake line at the end of a game, right? "Come here next season. I have money for you." Like, we know these things are happening. So, I can make an argument that, yes, these environments do seem toxic, but what does toxic mean?
Yeah, it's what's the source? Like, is it, I think people want it to be really simple,
Oh,
and the
it's getting
reality
that
is that
simple
it is
now?
not.
Oh, it wasn't that simple before, but it is the opposite end of simple now.
Yeah, it's so refreshing to hear a lot of the same things that I've been seeing and hearing and thinking for the past however many years, because as I've said, like, I'm from a family with a coach in it. And so for me, I'm like, okay, am I just like seeing it from a totally different perspective? Are other people gonna understand this or see this? And so obviously you've got so much great like inside perspective, but at least people are seeing things in a similar way. Maybe not everyone is seeing it through the same lens, but we're at least
Players
a few.
have a lot of voice and they have a lot of power in this environment. And again, not begrudging anybody any of that, but with great power comes great responsibility. And I hope that, I hope that coaches' reputations and I hope that players' reputations and I hope that all of this sort of settles out in a way that people can say, this wasn't the right spot for me, this wasn't the right fit, or I was able to get a better IL deal here, and this is why I'm leaving, and not try and not have coaches try and burn down players' reputations on the way out, and have players not try and burn down coaches' reputations on the way out. Because this job is hard enough as it is.
So we've talked about some of kind of the difficult things, some of the
Mhm.
tough movements that we've seen in
Mhm.
in coverage and in college athletics, but there's been so much good. There's so much engagement. There's so much coverage. There's just so much more respect given to women's sports and especially women's
Mhm.
basketball. What have you most enjoyed seeing in these, especially recent era, but just over the course of your career as women's sports continue to get so much greater of a foothold?
What makes me like this, I'm going to say this, the sound, the joyful noise, I call it. So, Valkyries, for example, the 18,000, the sound in that arena, the sound at the Final Four of a full crowd that is so into the game and so much behind the players. And like for me, that it's joyful noise. It is a sound of engaged, happy, excited, passionate fans, and that makes me really happy, like, it's a physical reaction, like, that sound goes up and you just feel that chill up your spine, like, "This is awesome." Um, and, and then just, a lot of credit to the players, and I would say this at collegiately and at the professional level for doing such a great job of branding themselves, making themselves brands, and, and people that are other people are interested in. We do our best in the press to tell the stories, but some of the players have done some of their best storytelling themselves and really engaged people. I admire that a lot. I think that the W in particular, the players in the W have done an outstanding job of really telling people who they are and what they want and what they believe in, and people respond to that. Again, relational. But my favorite part is just hearing the noise, like being in an arena and just hearing that sound and knowing how many people are excited about being there. And it's so much better than the old echoey sound of a half full arena and coaches yelling and a lot of whistles sort of echoing through the rafters. Like it's not the same sound anymore. And it's so great.
I love that. It's not something I think I would have like pointed out myself, but as soon as you say it, I'm like, yeah, that is it. Just you don't have to think about it too much. You feel it a lot more
Mhm.
viscerally, and that certainly is something that we have seen skyrocket.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's lots of great things about it. I mean, the coverage is, but there's more coverage. The networks have gotten involved. Women's basketball is good business. And that's the best thing is that instead of having to sort of beg for it, like people are the business, businesses are coming to women's basketball because they want to invest in good business. So that's great too. But for me, it's visceral. It's the noise.
I know you've got a whole lot of commitments. You've got commencement this week with your day job. You balance a lot, so we're gonna wrap here in just a couple minutes. But I have a couple questions here that I want to wrap
Mhm.
on. So the whole point of life's work is that the legacy of Coach VanDerveer and the impact of Stanford's women's basketball is not one that can really be summed up easily.
Mhm.
But if you had to, like, what do
Sure.
you hope would be the biggest takeaway for people reading your book?
Excellence, a constant pursuit of excellence from the players, from Tara, from her coaches, from the leaders. Honestly, like, and I would go back to NECA, who's going to go probably down as the greatest player that ever came through the program for a variety of reasons. But that pursuit of excellence, you see that excellence reflected in Shanae on your television screen. You see that excellence reflected in many, many places when it comes to former Stanford players. And it's that excellence that was instilled by Tara because Tara had a consistent pursuit of excellence. And so I think that that's for me kind of the fundamental piece.
And similarly, you are very much still active in the media. You're
Mhm.
still, you're still laying the legacy. But for you, what do you hope you are kind of laying the groundwork for, or what do you hope your work is remembered for, whether it be this book or any of the other myriad contributions you've been to the sports media landscape?
I mean, I just think I hope that my career has been a look, I've worked for many, many people. I stood on that stage at the Hall of Fame and rattled off like all of the lists of places that I've worked and people that I've worked for. And I think I said it takes a village to raise a women's basketball writer, right? Like it literally has, in that there are so many different ways and sources. And it's not about just one job at one outlet. It's not about the holy grail of I need to work here and I need to be one of the very few, be one of many. And take your opportunities to tell stories in a variety of venues. I mean, I've just had no choice. I had this very long career in which I've worked for so many different outlets and I've produced stories and did storytelling for so many different places. And I embrace that. I'm not sad that it wasn't 35 years at one place. I'm excited that all of these different places and in all of these different spaces, I've had an opportunity to tell stories. And so I think, especially when we still have so many folks freelancing, I'll be honest, right? Like we do have those full-time jobs and there are more of them, far more of them than ever. But we also have a lot of people still doing freelance and picking up stories and picking up things. And there's ton of honor in that. And there's a ton of value for the game in that.
I love that. That's amazing. Thank you so much. This has been an unbelievable conversation. It's great to start off the week talking women's hoops, but I don't know if there's a better way to start it than a conversation interview like this. So I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So before we go, where can people find you? And is there anything coming up outside of, obviously, go wherever books are sold? Your local bookstore is a great option for that, to go find life's work. But anything else you want to plug, or have people let them know where they can find you?
Yeah, I'm gonna be. I'm doing work for Howard Megdal's site, The Nine, and I'm doing a lot of Valkyries this summer. So you'll see me over at Chase Center, listening to the joyful noise and trying to get my story written while they're yelling in my ears. It's all good. It's the best thing. And then, I've got some book events coming up. So I'm going to go to the mothership of women's sports bars in Portland, and I'm going to do a signing at the Sports Bra on June 4th. And then I'm going to travel up the road to Rough and Tumble in Seattle, their women's sports bar. And I've done some of those and got more bookstore events coming up. But yeah, check me out at The Nine.
All right. Awesome. Well, folks, as always, I am Jamie Steyer Johnson. You can find me whatever social platform you're on at JSteyz, JSTEYZ, and make sure you're following Her Hoop Stats. That's at Her Hoop Stats for our social platforms. And of course, you want to make sure you're subscribed to the newsletter. We've got all sorts of great information coming out, team specific, league specific, getting into some of the analytics. We're past the first couple games where, you get sort of those outliers. You start getting 4 or 5 games into the season and you can start seeing some sort of trend. So it's important. You got to have your numbers. You got to have your analytics, and make sure you are following, subscribe to the newsletter, subscribe to the site, and make sure you're subscribed to the podcast, because we've got episodes coming out every weekday, as always. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michelle. Thank you for joining us, and we will talk to you next time.